Hi everyone. I have bought this two-part series of learning ASP.NET Core Web API using stored procedures, that is ADO.NET technology, and consume it with MVC. Now this is the part one where I will build the web API with Serilog logging and stored procedures, that is ADO.NET again. And this is, remember, if you have seen my videos regularly, this is actually stitched together a number of videos having about 19 parts to build that web API, and I have put them together into just one single video so that your learning is not hampered. There is a flow in your learning so that you don't have to wait for the next part and then again the next part. So I will switch over to the actual video. Welcome back. So in this section, I will be giving you the introduction for a big project that I'm going to undertake. It is about building and consuming an ASP.NET Core Web API using ADO.NET, and will consume by ASP.NET Core MVC. So here is the final running project. Now this project, on the left hand side, I have actually resized the browser so that it could be accommodated in one screen. So these are two projects. This is an MVC client to a web API. So when the API runs and you browse to the index, and it says that you have to make sure that your API project is running, and then click here. So when you click here, the customer page loads, and you can add a customer and get a customer by ID. So, and you can go to the order page. So this is actually a two-table relational database. Now this project is made without using entity framework, but I have used stored procedure with ADO.NET. Okay, for betterment of performance, and also for letting the students know that we could use the stored procedure, which is actually a more performance-wise better and efficient way than to actually use entity framework, which is much easier to use. It has got its own benefit, but I am sticking to the ADO.NET for this entire project. So if I click on add customer, I can create a new customer, let's say, and an address. Let us pick up one of these. And so there is a validation. So if I just write for this email, it will say that this field email must match the regular expression. So this is client-side validation. If I click tab away, I can add a customer. Basically, if any of these fields is empty, then it will immediately give you with a client-side form validation. Please put a name. Okay, so let's put Kaushik as the name, and then you tab away, then it is this validation error is gone. So this is client-side validation. And when you click on add customer, when it is submitting to the server, it is checking for the server model validation. Okay, so click on add customer. So immediately the customer appears in a different form below, and you could clear the form. You could go back to the customer and you can get a customer, say get customer by ID basically. So ID is 8. If the customer is existing, it will get the customer. Okay, so we'll do all that in the actual project. And if you go back and look to the order page, and if you wish to get an order or add order, if you wish to get an order, say with order ID 39, you'll get that order with the order ID 39 and the customer ID 19. So back to the order page, and if you wish to add an order, now let me just arbitrarily assign a customer ID 1. I'm not sure whether that customer exists with that ID 1 or not. And let's pick up one of these. I'm just testing to let you know about a feature in this application. If I click on add order, you'd expect to have an order added. However, nothing gets added, unlike the customer. So if you go back, whether you clear the form or not, if you go back, you can see that this order with the customer ID 1 is not here. So what happened actually? Now, I have actually handled a web API side error with a try-catch block, with try-catch blocks, but since I could not show the same error on the client, that is the MVC consuming that web API, I have alternately taken care to log that error so that whenever something happens which is not expected, you can check the log file. So here is the log file that is in the ctemp folder. So this has been configured in appsettings.json file, which I will show you later. So this is the log file which actually describes what the error is. So you can see that this is a system.data.sql client exception. The insert statement conflicted with the foreign key constraint fk order customer. Now I will describe in detail about this error later, but this was an introduction lecture where I wish to introduce about the project. So on to Visual Studio 2019 and create a new project. So these are my recent project templates. So I'll click on here, ASP.NET Core Web Application, click on Create, Next. And I'll have to give it a suitable name, and I will give this project name as Web API. But my solution name will be different because this solution will hold both the projects, the Web API as well as the MVC client project. So I will name it suitably. So Web API Core MVC client with the project name Web API, and click on Create, and I don't need to place the solution and project in the same directory. Okay, so I will keep it unchecked and then click Create. So on this create a new ASP.NET Core Web Application, I'll select the ASP.NET Core 3.1, which is already selected, .NET Core, and then empty, and click on Create, configure for HTTPS, and then Create. To take a wee while for creating the project, and we'll come back when the project is completed. So my project is created Web API within this solution, Web API Core MVC client. So in this lecture, we have seen how the starting point of creating a Web API using ASP.NET Core 3.1 and Visual Studio 2019. So in this lecture, I will be talking about the database that I have prepared for this project, So I have opened up the SQL Server Management Studio, and I have got the connect to server dialog, and this is my server type is database engine, and my server name is this with Windows authentication. I'll click on connect to connect to the server, SQL Server. So this is Object Explorer on the left hand side. It's pegged up, and this version of SQL Server Management Studio is SQL Server Management Studio version 17.1. All right. So if you have got any other forward version, that will also be all right. But I am using this one. So click on OK. Now on the database nodes, if I expand, I have already created this Web API database, which is exclusively for this project, and I've already created the tables and dbo.customer table and dbo.order table and some stored procedures. Okay, so these are the stored procedures, some of the stored procedures that will be used in this ADO.NET project, because I will not be using Entity Framework core, instead ADO.NET, and I have told you a little bit about the comparative study between the two. So this is the customer table. Now this customer table has got these columns: ID, this primary key, int not null, and this name, address, telephone, and email. So these are the data types. So if you right click and click on the design view, you can always change the table structure. You can add or remove columns from this. All right, so I will put a resource from where, if you don't have the SQL Server Management Studio, where you can download it from. And so these are the data type, column name, data type, and allow nulls. So ID column is you cannot allow null, and I have allowed null because I'm going to handle it from the front end, the client side and server side validation for any null values. So it is always a good practice to keep on allowing null. All right, and then for the keys, there's a primary key customer, and there are no other constraints or triggers or index. So you can click there, nothing is coming up. So only the customer table with the primary key and this order table. Okay, so I've talked about the order table earlier, that order table, customer to order table is a one-to-many relationship. One customer can have many orders, more than one order, but one order is only associated with one customer. So this is the customer ID, which is a foreign key, and description and order cost. So order cost is money and description is nvachar. And there is the foreign key, primary key, order, and foreign key. Now if you like to see how to script and what is the definition of this foreign key, you can create to a new query editor window. So this is the use web API DB, that is the database. Go alter table this with check add constraint, foreign key fk order customer, foreign key customer ID. Customer ID is the foreign key. So this order table is the many side of that relationship, and references dbo.customerID on update cascade and delete cascade. So delete cascade and update cascade means if there is no customer associated with a particular order, and if you are deleting a particular customer which has got an order, so all the corresponding orders will also be deleted. So there will be no orphaned order without any customer. Okay, and that here holds valid for update as well as delete. Okay, update, delete. Right. So I'm back to the SQL Server Management Studio and Web API database that I have created, previously and explained in the last lecture. And I have talked about the customer and order table structures. So let's see what are the state procedures. So as you can see, SP delete customer, SP delete order. So let's start with SP select customer and right click and script the stored procedure as create to a new query editor, just to see what the stored procedure is about. Now this is, I am understanding that you know the select, insert, update and delete queries. So that is the basic pre-requirement for this course. So once you know the CRUD queries, basic queries, I shall be able to explain to you so how to create the stored procedures. So now you can see that there is a stored procedure. If you right click, create the stored procedure. If you wish to create a fresh stored procedure, this is how it looks like. It comes up with a defined template. So template generated from Template Explorer. Okay, so a lot of things are there. So these are the comments with double dashes on the left hand side, author, create date and description, and create procedure, procedure name. But I have actually simplified this stuff so that you can easily understand it for those of you who have never created any stored procedure. So this is, I have simplified, and I have got rid of the additional stuff, got rid of the unnecessary stuff. So create procedure dbo dot sp select customer. dbo is the schema. Okay. So what happens is here it's a simple select query. Basically I have embedded the query within the procedure. Okay, select ID, name, address, telephone and email from DBO customer. So this was the query. Okay, so this is actually formalized into a stored procedure through this statement syntax, create procedure, the procedure name as begin, set no count on. So you don't need to bother about what do you mean by set no count on. You can leave this also and it will still work. Okay, and then when you begin a statement, you have to end it. So basically it is selecting from the customer table all the fields. So similarly, select customer by ID. If you click on, you can click on modify also without actually modifying, and that will be the alter procedure rather than a create procedure. So alter procedure sp select customer by ID. Here it is nothing but select all these columns from the customer table where ID equals @ID. Now this ID parameter this is supplied as an argument to the stored procedure. So as you can see here, add parameters for the stored procedure here. This is an external parameters. As we'll be later studying that, this stored procedure allows you to select the customer, filter the customer by ID. Okay, and then similarly we have got sp insert into customer. So if you click on modify, it will come up with the statement with the stored procedure scripted, and you can alter this stored procedure, but I just wanted to explain. So here for the insert statement, you have got these fields, name, address, telephone and email. So add the name, @address, @telephone, @email, and these are the data type with the field length, okay, as per the design of the table. And then it is a pure actually insert into statement, insert into dbo.customer, name, comma, address, comma, telephone, comma, email, and then everything into a embedded into a circular pair of circular braces. Then the values are obtained from the parameters supplied @name, @address, @telephone and email. All right, and then end. So similarly, the update stored procedure is select sp update customer, execute stored procedure, not execute stored procedure. You can execute also, but I would like to again go for modify just to script it so that you can understand. This is plain update statement. So again, the parameters are supplied from outside because you need to supply these parameters, name, address, telephone, as well as the ID for a particular record to be updated. So it's a plain update statement wrapped around a stored procedure like this. Okay, and update dbo.customer, set name equals @name. So these are the fields or columns for this customer table. Again, if you forget, just click on this and you can get through to the columns. So name, address, telephone, email. Okay, so ID doesn't need to be ID actually is supplied with this parameter that is supplied to the stored procedure, where ID column is @ID. Okay, so set, if you understand an update query, you can easily wrap it around or encapsulate it within update stored procedure. And finally, the sp delete customer. Okay, so it is a pure delete statement, alter procedure dbo.sp delete customer with the customer ID. So again, the ID parameter is necessary, at id int integer, and delete from dbo.customer where id equals @id. So once you understand all the stored procedures for this customer table, the CRUD stored procedure for the corresponding order table are exactly the same thing. So sp delete order, sp insert into order, sp select order, and sp select order by id and sp update order are following exactly the same procedure as we just learned about how to create the stored procedure for the customer. The only thing is that the column names will be changing. Say for example, wherever there are columns for the order table, it will be columns for the customer table, it will be substituted by the corresponding columns for the order table. Like for example, let's see this one. So order procedure dbo.sp select order. So here these are the select statements, select id, customer id, description, order cost from dbo.order. Okay, so dbo is the schema. You don't need to know much about the schema in order to do it. And this one dbo.order, when you create the new table, it will automatically affix the default schema of dbo. Okay, so order columns are again id, customer id, description, and order cost. So following exactly the same procedure, you could easily create the CRUD stored procedure of any other table. So I'll have to create a models folder in which I'll create the customer models. So right click on the project label and add new folder and name it models. Right click the models folder, click on add class, customer class, public class customer is created for me. So remember, again revisiting the customer table within the SQL Server Management Studio. Just for revision, I have got these columns: ID, name, address, telephone number, telephone, and email. So getting back to the Visual Studio, I'll have to map this class so that it has got a relationship with this, direct relationship with this customer table. So I'll create a few public properties to actually map to the columns of fields. So prop tab, then int, and this is the ID. This is string. And what was the second field? A second column was name, and just copy it over. But with the other two fields, they were address and telephone. So again the string. So varchar is mapped to string in C#, and name, address, and telephone. Right, the final field will be email field. Again, which is a string type in C#, corresponding to varchar or nvarchar. For culture neutral, which is nvarchar. So this is string. So my customer class is complete. So let's save it. And if you'd like, you could build it. Ctrl+Shift+B to see everything is all right or not. So here you can see that build has succeeded. So everything is fine. Nothing is broken so far. Just close this output window to get more space, and right click again on the models folder, add class. We will call this order class corresponding to the order table. So if you wish to see quick recall as to the fields in the order table, so we had this order table with ID, customer ID as foreign key, and description and order cost. Okay, so get back to the Visual Studio again, and here we'll create a public property, a set of public properties corresponding to each of these fields in the table, field or column. So public int, and this will be the ID again, the primary key, get set, and then public int, this will be the customer ID. This will be a string for the description. And finally the order cost, which will be of a C# decimal corresponding to the money in the SQL data type. Okay, so again this will be returning a decimal type, and I will call this order cost. All right, so that's all: ID, customer ID, description, and order cost. Okay, so in here in the models folder, right click again and add a class, and name this class ICustomerRepository, I for interface. So ICustomerRepository.cs. Okay, so instead of class, I will make it interface, and file name will still be .cs extension. Okay, CS means C#. All right, so it will have a few members. The first member will be, to return all the customers, it will return an IEnumerable of customer object. And then the second one is the second repository interface member will be get customer by ID, which will take an input ID and get the customer by ID, and it will return a customer object. So by ID, and it will accept ID as a parameter. Right, so this will, I'll make it, so data type was int ID, and then add customer, or insert a customer, add customer, passing a customer object. All right, I choose the auto suggested member, and then customer type return from the update customer member, update customer, which also accepts the customer type. Again customer, and then a delete customer, which returns a void or null. Delete customer, nullable integer ID, you can make it non-nullable because ID is not nullable when it returns a void, a null. So that's it. These are the 5 members which needs to be implemented in the implementing class, which will be customer repository. And we shall create on the models folder another class, add class, so IOrderRepository.cs file, and we'll change it to reflect an interface. Okay, public interface IOrderRepository. Right. So this will be exactly, the same way all the members of this interface, which will be ultimately converted into methods in the order repository class, they will follow the same pattern as in the ICustomerRepository. So again, IEnumerable on order, get all orders, all the method signatures, and then get order by ID with the parameter integer ID. Now this will be returning an order type, so order. Okay, so why this blue line is coming? So order, get order by ID. Now everything is fine. Previously it was showing with this type of color, light blue color, as if it was a type or a class, but it is not. It settled down. Now again, I'll return an order object, add order, in exactly the same way as it was for the customer, and this will take a parameter of order type. So order. And again, update order will also return an order object. Order. And finally, the delete order will return void and null. It will quietly delete the order from the table, and this will be int ID again, and you can just quickly build it by hotkey combination Control Shift and B to see that everything is fine and not broken. So the build succeeded, and we have got a working order repository interface and a customer repository interface. So in this lecture we have built an IOrder repository interface which needs to be implemented by an order repository class. So once again, within the Visual Studio, I have opened the appsettings.json file, which is at the root level of this project, and we have got the appsettings.development.json, but which we can keep unchanged, and this is this appsettings.json that will be changing. So all you need to do is to put a connection string, which I have got on my clipboard. Okay, so this is the connection string, and this is under this top level, root level, and the default connection is data source is my server, desktop, this is the name of my computer, / SQL Express. This is the the SQL server basically, which is what this was. This was the SQL server, which is the server, and initial catalog is the database, which is Web API DB. Okay, so this was the database Web API DB under this SQL server, and then integrated security true and trust server certificate false. These actually belong to the Windows authentication, and application intent read write and multi subnet failover false. Don't worry about these terms, these are not actually in the scope, but sufficient to say that this is the default connection string. So in this lecture we have seen how to form the connection string within the appsettings.json. So we'll be using this connection string. So logging, in this case I will restrict it to logging of the error or exceptions. So by the end of this lecture, we shall know how to include the Serilog. I'll be including a few packages from a third-party NuGet package Serilog in the Web API, and configure appsettings.json and startup.cs file startup class to include the Serilog logging packages. And in this application, we shall implement error logging to external files by using Serilog NuGet packages for the Web API project. The strategy is to handle the error within the methods on the Web API repositories and write to the log file. So I'll be soon embarking upon creating the repository. So before that, it will be good that I will tell you the integration of Serilog for logging, and there are certain advantages of Serilog, and I will put in the resources. Okay, so when the client MVC application calls the Web API but doesn't get the expected response to generate the requisite views, the log files need to be inspected to understand this behavior. All right, so I'll be, as I have shown you the finished product, so the MVC client was calling on the Web API, and if you look into some of the functionalities, you will find that some of the expected behavior of the entire application, where the MVC client gets its response from the Web API, if the Web API handles those errors and it logs those errors, and if that expected behavior on the client side is not achieved, like in terms of the browser rendering of some form or some information, then you need to inspect the log files. And this may most likely to happen on the database side, and so undertake any corrective action as per the logs. Now, in case there is no return customer or order without any DB error from the query, with say, for example, if you're searching by an ID, a particular ID for the customer and order, and there is no such customer or order exists with that ID, still a browser will tell the users of this and the application will not fall over. So I will carry on in the next lecture about the actual integration part of the Serilog and the required configuration changes. Now let me right click Web API package and manage NuGet packages. So no packages installed. Now let's browse to one other package which is known as Serilog.asp.ASP.NET Core. So Serilog, search for Serilog.ASP.NET Core. And install it. So it's installing the package. So accept this condition. Serilog.ASP.NET Core. So successfully installed the package. Next, I have to install this Serilog.settings.configuration. Okay, so click on install again. Just getting the package. Accept the condition. And lastly, I'm looking for this package, Serilog.syncs.rolling file. So this is the right package. Okay, let me install the latest pre-release. So I have now these three Serilog related packages installed: Serilog.ASP.NET Core, Serilog.settings.configuration, and Serilog.syncs.rolling file. Now I need to change the appsettings.json file in my project. So I will just comment out the existing piece of code for the logging by default from Microsoft, and then just comment this part, and I will keep the connection strings part. And then after this, I will just copy from my clipboard. All right, so this part, and there is a starting curly brace on top. Get rid of the end brace. Now everything is fine, so no squiggly lines. So the connection string is there, plus all that is necessary for the Serilog package to be included in the appsetting.json in the application. And this is the rolling file. And this is the file that will store the log of all the errors. Now then, setting Serilog itself, this write to, you can see this is an array. Okay, this is an array, and it means that you can set up many things. Means the destination of the log, in our case, this is the rolling file, and this is the destination of the log with this template. And it is restricted to the minimum level of error. So nothing less than error like debug or info or warning will not be logged. And this application is named common feature in Web API demo. This says that it is an indicator as to what log belongs to what application. Now I am into the startup file, and above the configure services method to where we register our services, we'll create an IConfiguration object. IConfiguration, and this uses a namespace. Click on quick actions and refactoring, and it will gather the suggestion using Microsoft.extension.configuration namespace. All right, and then name it configuration, configuration, and then I'll have to create this startup public constructor. So CTOR to configure the startup, and then put this object over there, configuration. So configuration, this configuration, this small c, and then this configuration with capital C equal to the passed in argument to the dependency injection. Okay, inversion of control over here. So I am going to use this configuration here, and another line will be, I'll have to init the Serilog configuration. So this will be from log dot, not this, log. It will tell me what namespace to use, log dot logger and let me include it, use Serilog. Okay, that is the important thing over here. So log.logger equals new logger configuration, dot read from dot configuration, passing this configuration object dot create logger dot create logger. Okay, so I've created the logger using the Serilog package. Okay, right. And now into the configure method, which is, as you know, is the middleware pipeline. So below the environment.isDevelopment section, I'll have to use logger fact. So I'll have to actually first include into the argument for this configure method an iLogger factory object, iLogger factory. So let's see, logger factory, and then here just below the development exception page, so logger factory dot add Serilog. This is the middleware pipeline. So if you browse to this add Serilog to the logging pipeline, it shows on the mouse over that it returns a logger factory. Okay, and that marks the end of the integration of the Serilog into the pipeline, into the application, and we'll be using it later while we create the repository class. So let's build this at this instance to see everything is all right, nothing is broken. Ctrl+Shift+B. So build has succeeded, so nothing is broken. So we have seen how to integrate the Serilog NuGet package into the application for logging purposes. Now inside this models folder, I will create another class, add class and name this customer repository. So customer repository class, right? So public class customer repository is created for me, and here this class will implement the ICustomerRepository interface. All right, so this was the ICustomerRepository. So I will just open it side by side. So it has got a few methods, which are just the signatures: get all customers, get customer by ID by passing the ID, then add customer, update customer, and delete customer. The usual CRUD operations: create, retrieve, update, and delete. Okay, so I will have to implement. So this is because we have not so far implemented, so it doesn't implement interface member this and this. So don't worry about this squiggly line, it will all go in a few minutes time. But if you are unhappy about these squiggly lines in the first place, what you can do is you can click on this potential fixes and implement the interfaces, either all members explicitly or implicitly. So you can go for any of these. I'll go for implement interface implicitly. Okay, so all of these methods, the shells are created with the throw new not implemented exception, but this, because this is returning the type of object that is required in this ICustomer setting, ICustomerRepository interface. So if you just keep it in a new vertical tab group, you can see what I mean. So this is expecting a return of a get all customers is returning IEnumerable of customer, and get customer by ID is returning a customer. So this is acceptable as an implementation or a shell of implementation on which we will build. So what I will do, I will start writing. First of all, what I have to do is I have to initialize a few fields and then initialize the customer repository public constructor. Okay, so if you want, you can just follow me. I will keep it intact, and then public property, and this will be of an I configuration type. I configuration, and I'll call it configuration. Get set, and then a public string to represent the connection string. And then a private read-only iLogger property in which the customer repository will be filled, passed. So private read-only iLogger of iLogger type of this customer repository class that we are going to build, and call this, name this variable underscore logger. All right, and then create the public constructor. So, and pass these two objects. Just copy from here. And now let this be known with small c. Start with small c for configuration, and then this iLogger object. Of customer repository type. So copy this and paste this, and I will name this as logger. Okay, and then this dot configuration, or simply configuration, this is this class configuration equals this passed on configuration object with small c. So this is inversion of control or dependency injection, if you know. So, and then this connection string object, this connection string which I have declared up here with a public string, this will use this configuration object configuration with a pair of rectangular braces, and then this will get its value. Let me just complete it, terminate it with semicolon so that it stops giving the squiggly lines. And then connection strings, I'll tell you in a bit where is it come from. So it comes from the appsettings.json. So connection strings, and this was named as default connection. So connection strings colon default connection. If you quickly have a look over here, connection strings and default connections. Right. So I've been able to initialize the customer repository public constructor. Now, in this lecture, I will also finish one of the methods and take it from the next lecture for the next method. So first of all, let us build this application to see everything is all right or anything is broken or not. So Control Shift B again. So build succeeded. So I'm fine. I can add this here. So I'll remove this part and get all customers. So I'll start with a list, generic list of customer, which is customers. Take the suggested customers field, so new list of customer and a pair of empty circular brackets. Okay, now comes the fun. I'll be using the using statement, and I'll be using the area.net. So please follow me carefully. So using now SQL connection con. Here it is giving me an objection, so I can fix it by going to the light bulb and generate class. So all of these suggestions are not valid, so I'll have to install this package system.data.sql client. Okay, so find and install the latest version or install with package manager. So browse, click on accept. I am just installing system.data.sql client. This is installed successfully. You can see here in the installed. So this is all installed. Right. So I don't worry about this squiggly lines, this output errors, build errors. So I'll be completing it first and then worry about these squiggly lines. So using SQL connection con, I have already got this. So I will use this using statement using system.data.sql clients. So this has installed the using statement using system.data.sql client, and then I am ready to write this using SQL connection con equals new SQL connection, and I'll pass this connection string, which I have declared up. Okay, so connection string, right, and then below this using statement is a pair of curly braces in which all the code will be there. So first of all, let's do a try block, try catch. It's just exception handling. I'll just close this. All right, so SQL command. Then there is another new object, SQL command over here. And SQL command is, I'll just name this CMD is equal to new. I'll tell you in a bit what is the SQL command. And here this SQL command is initializes a new instance of the SQL command class. It is a command you can pass in text, or you can just pass in your stored procedures. So you've got this 4 overloads. So I'll be using this is the command text in case you are just writing a query straight away, which is not the case here. So I will be using the command text and then the connections. Okay, so command text in my case, it will be the stored procedure, which is so within double quotes, this is dbo.spselect customer, and I will pass this connection string and then semicolon to terminate the code, and then this try block is actually requiring a catch block. Okay, so try in this block of statement and then catch. This is exception handling, so I can paste some useful links for you to try out this try catch, this exception handling. So now command type. Now in this case, it will be system.data.command type, or dot. We have got this as a stored procedure, not a text. Stored procedure. So because I am going to call this stored procedure, which I have already written in the SQL command. So command.command type is a stored procedure, command type.stored procedure, and then in the next line I'll have to open the connection. Connection.open. So this is all ADO.NET. I'm calling the Microsoft SQL Server and calling the database and selecting the spselect customer. This is the stored procedure for this purpose. And then there is a SQL data reader object, because I have to read the data. This is a retrieve operation. SQL data, not data adapter, but data reader. Call this RDR. Now this SQL data reader class is read only and forward only, meaning you cannot write to it, and once you have read a record and go to the next record, there is no way for you to go to the previous one. So that gives it the advantage. Now here, I have come to the stage of initializing an instance of the SQL data reader class. So SQL data reader cannot be created using the new operator. Like you cannot create just like that SQL data reader RDR equals new SQL data reader. And instead, SQL command objects. So this is the SQL command object, CMDs. Execute reader method creates and returns an instance of SQL data reader. So I'll have to write CMD dot execute reader to create an instance of the SQL data reader class. Okay, and this is connection oriented. SQL data reader is connection oriented, meaning it requires an active connection to the database while reading the data. That's why this connection was required over here, and connection needed to be open. However, this connection doesn't need to be closed. So and instead this connection gets automatically closed at the end of the using code block. And one thing we have to remember, that this reader needs to be closed when done reading. So armed with these things, let's move forward. And within this try block itself, there will be a while, there will be a loop, because you have initialized that reader object, but while reader.read, that is the while block. While it is still reading something. Now this read method, it advances the SQL data reader to the next record. Okay, so if there is a next record, do this within the loop while reader.read. I'll initialize a customer object. New customer. And then once this customer object is initialized, I can call all its fields, properties, customer dot, you can see customer.id to start with. Now here is a trick, how will the customer ID be got from the reader? So here, first of all, because ID we know is a integer, int, which is a primary key. So first of all, this reader reads like this. So reader with a pair of empty braces, rectangular braces, and if you name this column within double quotes, it can read it if only this is converted into its specified type. Now this is supposed to be a string, system.string, you can see. So I'll have to convert it into the integer. Convert dot to int32, okay, 32-bit integer. And then other things are easier because they are all varchar or string. So customer.name, customer.name equals RDR. What do you think? What should I write over here? You're right if you think within a pair of rectangular braces, if I write name and just to take absolutely no chances to make it to string, to explicitly cast it to string. All right. Now, one thing I have not mentioned so far, that what are these within quotes, quoted strings ID and name, which serve here as the index to the reader object. Now, if you look into the Microsoft SQL Server and the customer table, these are actually the fields or the columns of the customer table. So they need to have the same spelling. So there is no typo allowed over here, and they will actually get the name and the ID values from this reader object. Okay, so there you are. And then for the other few properties, let me dump the code from my clipboard, which will make it much shorter. All right, now that you know the process, so there's no harm in pasting it from my memory and then have it completed. And at the end, this customer's object, I'll add to this list, I'll add this customer. So customers, because that's a list, dot add, and this newly generated customer. Okay, this will make it happy. And still not, because I have not returned an IONumerable. Now, outside this while loop, this reader is done reading. Obviously, while the loop is still running, it was reader was required. Now it is no more required. So I will call the close method of this reader. So reader.close to close the reader. And as I have already said, that connection doesn't need to be closed. It will automatically get closed once you get to the outside the using statement. So I will not close the connection, and it will automatically be closed. So catch block, into the catch block, and then this exception object is passed, exception X, and then I will use the logger that we have passed as a dependency injection logger object, logger dot log error. And what I will log, there are quite a few, there are 4 overloads. So I will be using one of the overload exception and then the exception message for this exception. So error just to know that in case there is an error, this has been originated in this method, and then colon and then an emoji bracket, okay, and then semicolon, and once the catch block is throwing an exception, excuse me, no customers is returned, so customers equals null. And finally, outside the using statement, the connection is already closed and I am still inside the method, and I will return the customers, return customers, which is a list type. And why this satisfies this requirement of returning an IEnumerable customer? Because list of customer is list is also deriving from IEnumerable. It is implementing IEnumerable interface. IEnumerable T interface is implemented by list of T. Okay, so in this lecture we have saw thoroughly how we can use the area.net object and SQL data reader and SQL command object to get all the customers by using our SP select customer stored procedure on the SQL Server database. So last time I have completed this method get all customers, and we have seen the execute reader and the SQL command and data reader in action. We have explained about the various things. So for this get customer by ID, I'll still be using the same procedure, SQL data reader and the command object and execute reader. So it will be basically a repeat of the get all customers. The only difference that I need to pass in an ID parameter. This ID parameter needs to be used. Now if you flip back to Visual SQL Server Management Studio, and I have opened this SP select customer by ID, and this is the stored procedure responsible to get the customer by ID. You can see here that this is a select from where clause is there, where this ID is to be supplied by an external parameter, this @ID, which is of type integer. So this is, you have to add this parameter. So how do we do that? So let's flip over to Visual Studio once again, and all I will do, just not to repeat the same stuff again and again, I will just go and copy from here and then change the bits. Just get rid of this statement. Now let's change the bits in this get customer by ID procedure. The first thing that we have to do is, this is just returning a customer as opposed to a list. So I'll initialize a customer object, customers equals new customer. And then keeping this using statement exactly the same, the next thing to change is this new SQL command. Now this was actually SP select customer for getting all the customers. Now this has changed. This will change to select customer by ID. Now after this procedure is over writing, we will inspect this stored procedure by executing actually in the SQL Server Management Studio to verify our result also. All right, so command.command type, that's the same, system.data.command type.stored procedure, connection.open, and then SQL data reader and cmd.execute reader. And above this statement, above initializing the SQL data reader, and after connection has been opened, I have to make this change to incorporate an external parameter, ID parameter, with this code. So command object dot parameters, there is a parameters type, there's a parameters property, and then add with value. This is the method, and it takes two parameters. First is at ID. Now this at ID, which I'm going to write, this ID, this is a parameter which I will show you in the stored procedure in the SQL Server Management Studio, and this is fed, the value is fed from this ID parameter that is passed to this procedure. And then this line is the same, and while reader.read, so I guess that you have done my last lecture on get all customers. If not, please go through that, where I have explained everything about the SQL data reader. Again, I will repeat in short that the SQL data reader, the instance of the SQL data reader is created by calling the execute reader method on the command object, SQL command object. Okay. And while reader.read means while this returns a boolean true, if there are more rows. So if there are more rows available, what it does, it advances the SQL data reader to the next record. Okay. And this one should be removed. Okay. Because I have to get a customer by ID. Okay. So what happens here is customer.id equals sorry, here actually it should be customer. Okay, so customer.id is the supplied ID to this procedure as a parameter. So customer.id equals the ID, and customer.name is reader, the name parameter of the reader object dot to string, and similarly the customer.address, address parameter dot to string, and everything else is the same except that this line should be got rid of. This was for the get all customers. Okay, and then I need to close the reader and then catch exception. Here I have to make another small change, that it logs to the log file in the Serilog specified path. So get, here it will be get customer by ID to reflect this procedure, name of this procedure. This was the error that was trapped at get customer by ID method, and then customer equals null, and then return customer. And that's all. So let's build this application once again with Ctrl+Shift+B. Now, so the build is all right. So we'll now move on to SQL Server Management Studio to inspect this procedure, to execute this procedure. It will be a good idea to test our stored procedure before actually working with it in the C# Visual Studio. So you can easily test by executing the stored procedure. You can, if you click on execute stored procedure, a UI comes actually, and you have to pass in the parameters, and there you are. So see, all that you have to pass is an ID parameter. And now here I can pass an ID parameter because I know there is a record in the customer table with the ID 13. So I'll pass a value 13 and click on OK to execute the stored procedure. And if everything is all right, see, I have got this ID with this name John Roy Smith and address, telephone, email. So my stored procedure works, and I am able to get a record with that ID. Now let's shift our focus to the inserting a record. So get all customers, add customers. Okay, so add customer. So I'll get rid of this throw new not implemented exception. It's not required. Now just to save time typing, I have copied on my clipboard the entire procedure, completed procedure, and I will start explaining. So here So I have pasted the procedure for the adding the customer with a customer object supplied as a parameter. Now here it is asking for a potential fix because I have not used system.data. So it is asking for this library to be included. So system.data, it is now added. So system.data, so now the squiggly line is gone. Now here, this is starting is very similar. We are starting a using statement much in the way that we used a SQL connection within a using block in the this one, get all customers. Okay, using SQL connection con equals new SQL connection and passing the connection string that we have done in the previous lecture. So we start with the same way, and then within this try catch exception block, and this is for exception handling, if you know what I mean. I'll put a resource for this try catch block in the description, and this SQL command is again new SQL command, and this is the command, this is the text, and this is the connection string connection. Now in order to differentiate that this is a stored procedure that we are executing rather than an ad hoc SQL command, so we have got the command type property on the SQL command object, which is command type dot stored procedure. And so there are this is a table direct and text also. This is an enum. Okay, so this is an enum system.data.command type. So in order to actually tell the procedure that we are using a stored procedure, and this is a stored procedure, not an ad hoc SQL command, we have to write this line, and then we have to open the connection, and then command dot parameters dot add with value that that I have told in the previous get customer by ID, how to add an external parameter with the which is supplied to the stored procedure into the C# procedure. So that is the command objects parameters property. Okay, and then add with value, and this add with value, one of the overloads takes a parameter name and the object value. So parameter name is name, address, telephone, and email. How did we come to this conclusion? And let's get back to this stored procedure sp insert into customer. Okay, so sp insert into customer, this is sp insert into customer. If you just script the stored procedure, so these are the externally supplied parameters at name, address, at telephone, and at email. So all are in varchar or string type in C#. Okay, and just to make sure that this procedure works, you can again execute this stored procedure by supplying all the parameters yourself. So if you just give it a arbitrary value, say Albert, that, and then telephone, any arbitrary value just to test it, and email, and then click on OK. It should insert this into the return value 0, and let's see the customer table again. So customer table was somewhere here. So if you click on execute again, it should have this XY Albert, the last one, 11XYZ street. So our insert stored procedure works. All right. Now that we have seen that the first thing, the parameter name has been supplied from this stored procedure as an external parameter. Now the next thing is the value. Okay, so what are the value? So at name value is supplied from this customer object, which is supplied as a parameter to this add customer method, customer.name. So these are the properties of the customer object. So name, address, email, telephone. So these values come from the supplied customer objects properties. Okay, Now, one new thing that we are seeing here is an execute non-query. Previously, we have seen for the data reader, it was, what was that? For the data reader, it was the execute reader to retrieve the values from the reader. But here it is execute non-query. So remember, the insert, update, delete operations, they use execute non-query. And what is this execute non-query? Let's get back to the, so this is, it executes a transact SQL statement against a connection and returns the number of rows affected. Okay, so number of rows affected, but it also executes the query. In this case is the insert. It's an insert operation. So okay, so add customer is done and over with. So let's get to the update customer. Get rid of this. The only change here is that I don't need to explicitly close the connection because I am using the connection within the using block, and at the end of this using statement, it will automatically close the connection. Okay, so let's do a Control Shift and B to build this application once again. Now the application build succeeded, and in order to build it successfully, I had to again resort back to this throw new not implemented exception pending our completion of this update customer, which we will do now. So I have again copied the update customer on my clipboard, and I will paste it and explain. So update customer has dumped the code from my clipboard. Now here you can see it's almost exactly the same. It's almost the same as I was saying, except the fact that it is asking for an ID parameter, because you are updating a record which is already existing and with a particular ID. So ID parameter needs to be supplied. Okay, and other than that, the name of the stored procedure is also different, SP update customer. Now let's flip over to SQL Server Management Studio to see the update procedure in action. So SP update customer. So let's get back to SP update customer. So I will go over here on my stored procedure and execute stored procedure. Again, I just wanted to show you. So ID, let's pass an ID of say 15. I want to update this record 15, and let's have the name be the same, address is the same, and you can pass null value over here. Address be the same, and telephone, let's change that telephone to something else. Okay, so Jack, say 222. Okay, and email was null value. Okay, so here I am passing null value just to quickly show, and this null values will be passed, it will not be recorded. So you will get only the ID, and name is not a good idea to pass a null value. So okay, let's keep it as Jack, and address and telephone as null value, and click on OK. All right, and then let's again see our customer table. Okay, so this is, look at this record. If we execute this, so see, address is null, telephone 2222, telephone has changed, email is null, and name and ID are the same. All right, so I've been able to update the value. And if I had supplied the value of address and email, which you would expect to have been updated properly. So that is the end of this update customer. The only thing I overlooked in this update customer method is I don't need the connection.close anymore. So I'll get rid of this because it is still under the using statement. So as soon as the using block is ended, the connection will automatically close, which I've been stressing again and again. So this is the delete customer method. Okay, so that is executing another sp delete customer stored procedure, and still we are using the using block with the SQL connection object and passing the connection string over, and then creating a SQL command object and passing the stored procedure sp delete customer. And we are opening the connection, and here you don't need to close the connection because we are using a using statement. And because it's a delete operation, so as I told you in the beginning of this lecture, so insert, update and delete all require the call of execute non-query method on the SQL command object to update or delete or insert a record. And the only parameter required to be supplied was ID parameter. And if we look at buildings application, it is not returning anything because it is just deleting a customer, okay, in the database. So Ctrl+Shift+B to build this application again, and the build succeeded. And let's see a delete stored procedure also in action by deleting a customer record. So sp delete customer. Okay, so execute stored procedure. So let's delete this customer with an ID 15. Okay, execute stored procedure. ID 15. Click on OK to execute this stored procedure. Okay, and then where was my customer record? Let's see. Okay, let me get this customer record again by right clicking, select top 1000 rows, and you see the ID with value 15 is gone. It's no more, it's deleted from the table. So that marks the end of all the CRUD methods, in C# that I had to write for completing the customer repository. Thank you. So first of all, I will create a order repository class in the models folder by right clicking the models and add class. And call this class order repository. All right, and it will be helpful because I've already completed the customer repository class, that I keep this as a separate tab, separate vertical group. So new vertical document group, and copy over the bits and pieces. Now here I can see that the customer repository has got all these using statements that are important. So I will copy them over to order repository class. So copy, and then I'll just paste it over these. And these are all the using statements that I will be ever requiring. So the using statements that are not required by the customer repository, they are, in light color. So what I will do, I will delete them on this side, so that, remove using statements that are not necessary. So here it is. Now this order repository class, just like the customer repository class, is going to implement the IOrderRepository, okay, which is within the same namespace. So this is the IOrderRepository, right? And then because it is not implementing all the members, so this is complaining. Let's see the potential fixes. Like we did, we'll implement the interface by throwing the stubs, new not implemented exception for all the members of this IOrderRepository class, which we will write eventually, like we did in the customer repository class. So first of all, just to save a lot of time, I'll just copy this part over on this order repository class, okay? Because they will be exactly the same, these fields. So I'll be making use of this iConfiguration object and then connection string and iLogger. Only change will be here, it will be order repository instead of customer repository. So order repository, this one, and again call it logger. And then I'll have to create the public constructor CTOR public order repository, and then I will pass this iConfiguration object, and call this configuration like we did for the public constructor of customer repository. So I will call this with a small c. So the auto suggested one I will take, and then I will do exactly the same way. I will initialize this dependency and make this configuration field assume this value. Configuration is assigned this value, the passed on dependency configuration. And then again this part also will be exactly the same, so I will copy it over from this part, connection string, click on end and then Control C to copy and then paste it over here. That makes our life so much easier, isn't it? So now add order. So in this one, so I've already initialized the order repository class this way, and I'll build this project, Control Shift B. So you all can see that build succeeded, one succeeded. We have got just one project and the build has succeeded. Now let's go for the get all customers. So we'll get all order, get all orders, okay? And here I'll just get more realistic by closing this one, Solution Explorer, Team Explorer as well. All right, so here instead of, I will just comment it out or get rid of this stub, delete, and here instead of list of customer you should have list of what? Order. Simple as that. So list of order, and I'll call this orders. I'll take this auto suggested is equal to new list of order, the pair of circular braces. Right. So again this squiggly line is because I haven't returned any IEnumerable of type order. And then I will just copy this part using SQL connection, or just let me write SQL connection object, again call this con equals new SQL connection. And what have we passed over here in the parameters to this SQL connection object, connection string? Right, so I have to pass the connection string again. So that is the object that we configured over here, connection string with Pascal, this camel casing. So connection string. Right. So here, now this using statements has to start over here. Let me just shrink it a little bit to get more space over on this side. And start brace, end brace, curly brace, and then try statement. And then let's close this down because it is hindering. Okay, and close these two tabs as well. Okay, now we get all the space that we need. Now within the using block, I've got the entire statement that I have got on my memory. So now I have dumped all the code that is required for the get all orders method, because there is no point in writing everything all over again when I have explained it in a previous lecture for the SP select customer, for the selecting all the customers. So it is exactly the same. And now the thing is, finally below this using statement, at the end of this using statement, after the end of this, I have to return orders to satisfy the, not this order, but this orders. All right, so let's again see what we did. I'm just a repetition. So if you'd like to skip over this part of this lecture, you feel free to do so. So again, I have initialized a SQL connection object con and passed in the connection string, which I have initialized over here in the order repository constructor. Okay, right. And then in the try catch block, in the try block, I try with the SQL command object and by passing the SP select order and the connection string. Okay, so this is also the parameter is a text, but because this is a stored procedure, so as compared to ad hoc SQL text or query, this command type property of the SQL command object is having this enum, command type is again enum, and it is the stored procedure. This says that this is to be treated as a stored procedure, not a ad hoc SQL command, and then open the connection and then create a data reader by calling the execute reader method of the command object, SQL command object. Now here, I just wanted to tell you that you cannot initialize with the new operator for the SQL data reader instance, because it doesn't make sense, because SQL data reader is actually a data reader which reads the data in a retrieve, in the select. So now again, when the reader dot read, that means when when it reads true, when it returns true, and it advances the SQL data reader to the next record, when the next record is available after the execution of the stored procedure, till we have the next record available. So we create an instance of the order class, and then we create the order properties by reading from the reader, by writing like this, readers, the index to the reader, like reader within double quotes and a pair of rectangle braces, ID, and then order.customer ID is assigned. This again, it has to be converted. Customer ID was also an integer, so it has to be converted to integer, and then it is read with this statement, RDR within this is enclosed within a pair of rectangular braces and the string customer ID, and description and order cost are string, so they are written as such. The order cost is not a string, sorry, it is in decimal, so it is to be converted to decimal and then read from order cost, the order cost parameter of the reader. And then orders is this list of order, to this list of order, we are adding this order. Okay, and then actually there is again no need to close the connection. All you need to close is the reader object that we have seen. So rdr.close. You call the close method to close the reader, and the connection is automatically closed at the end of the using statement. And in the catch block, we are catching the exception by using the logger object that we have created over here. Oh my God, here I have just caught an error. So it's not quite correct. I have to initialize this logger instance in there as a dependency. So it is telling that order repository dot underscore logger is never assigned to, and it will always have its default value set to null. All right. So so now we just caught my own error. So what I will do is I will pass a ILogger object, ILogger with the type of order repository, and call this logger suggested value logger, and then this underscore logger, which I declared as a field, underscore logger, is equal to the passed in dependency, and then build it again. Now Control Shift B to build it again. Now you can see by magically this green squiggly line has vanished, so it is no more. It will be passed as a null value, so because it is passed as a dependency. Now everything is all right, so I should get a logger object from this method get all order if there is an exception if it comes to this catch block, and then finally it returns the order. I hope it makes sense how we executed the SP select order. Now for a quick check, we can run the SP select order to see for ourselves. So let's go back to the SQL Server Management Studio, SP select order, and then if we execute the stored procedure like we did for the customer repository, it will open that UI. So this is the stored procedure. It doesn't require any external parameter to be supplied. So click on OK. It should execute it, and it returns this ID, customer ID. This is the order ID, customer ID, which is the foreign key and description, and then order cost, and a return value of 0. Okay, this is the select return value at return value. So we see that we are able to execute the stored procedure, and we have got a list of all the orders, get all orders, which we will see in action later. Okay, so last lecture I have walked you through the process of writing this method get all orders, which returns a list of orders or IEnumerable type of order. Okay, so let's now concentrate on get order by ID. So let's get rid of this throw new not implemented exception block and start writing our code. So I will create an order object. So order of order type, and then that's using statement, which I have copied to my memory, and I will dump it from the memory or clipboard back over here, and finally we'll return this order, and I will explain. It is exactly the same as we have seen the explanation for the get customer by ID, passing an integer ID. So return order over here. However, let's see again, inspect it closely. So again, the using statement, it starts with a SQL connection object, and it instantiates a SQL connection with a connection string, passing the connection string, which is the string which is pointing to the database in the appsettings.json. Okay, so this is the connection string which is initialized with the configuration. This is the app settings file. Okay, now then again, within the try block, I have initialized a SQL command object and passed in this stored procedure, the name of the stored procedure, dbo.spSelectOrderById, and the connection string, this con. And then I have given the command type to specify that we are looking at a stored procedure for execution, and then open the connection, and then, as we have seen earlier, to the command object I have used the parameters property and then the add with values method, and passing the ID parameter from the stored procedure, and the value is ID, which is passed on to the as a parameter to this method getOrderById. And then again switching over to this SQL Server Management Studio and looking at spSelectOrderById. So spSelectOrderById, where is that? spSelectOrderById. If you look into the stored procedure script, the stored procedure is create to new query editor window. So this is a simple stored procedure that returns an order by ID. So it's a simple select from where clause, and where this ID is taken from the passed in parameter @id integer, which is nothing but this @id. Now again, as I've shown you earlier, let us execute spSelectOrderById. Execute the stored procedure and passing it an ID. Let's say just any arbitrary value 13, assuming that the ID 13 for the order table exists, order ID, and if it exists then it will show something, otherwise it returns null. Okay, so there is no order with the ID 13. So let's see this table dbo.order, what it returns. So there are 3 orders with ID 11, 39 and 52. So let's see, ID equal 11, and click on execute, and it returns the record with the ID of 11 and a customer ID of 16. So it verifies the authenticity of our select stored procedures spSelectOrderById, and again a data reader object is initialized with the command objects execute reader method, and while the reader is advancing to the next record, if it is true, reader.read method returns true. That means when it advances the SQL data reader to the next record, when the next record is available, it forms the order object with order.id and order.customerId, order.description, order.orderCost, by suitably casting the reader objects, whatever is returned from the reader, with reader and a pair of this square braces within quotes. These are the columns of this order table: ID, customer ID, description, and order cost. So if you look into this order table again, so order table, which are the columns, so ID, customer ID, description, in the order cost with the same spelling, right? So it forms this order object, okay, assigning these values. And then you again, there's a mistake, you don't need to close the connection explicitly, and it will automatically close when you leave the using block. So your get order by ID is over, it returns an order object, okay. And if it throws an exception, this catch block will actually log a message into the log file wherever it is specified in the Serilog configuration in the app settings. So this is the app settings file. So this will log it into the ctemp log with the date, current date, and .text format, okay, as a text file. Now let's complete the other methods like insert, update and delete. Then I have come to this add order method, and I will get rid of this new not implemented exception and then add the code, which I have been again copied from my clipboard, which saves a lot of time, and then just indent it a bit. And again, using SQL connection equals new SQL connection string, and it's now all too obvious because I have repeated it many times. And I've just started writing with an experimentation with logger object.log information could break here, where the potentiality of breaking the code over here. And then I have initialized the SQL command object with a new SQL command using the new operator and passing the dbo.sp insert into order, which is the stored procedure command type.stored procedure, and passing the connection string. Okay, and then open the connection, and then with the command.parameter.add with the value at customer ID, at description, at order cost, and within the add with the value method, you expect an object, a string of parameter name, and this is the parameter name, and this is the value. Value is achieved from order.customer ID, order.description, and order cost. Okay, from this order object passed. And then again, there's a mistake. So connection doesn't need to be closed explicitly, it will automatically close. And then command.execute non-query to execute the transact SQL statement against the connection, and it will return the number of rows affected, but which we are not interested, but it actually executes the transact SQL and adds that row to the order table. That's where we are interested. And then if it falls to the catch block, then logger will log the error at the part that I have shown you previously at ctemp log dev.txt. And with this statement, error at add order. Okay, and if everything is all right and outside the using statement, it will return the order again. So hopefully you are able to understand this add order method again. And then finally, update order and delete order. So get order by ID. This is the update order. So let's get rid of this part. So I will just dump the code. This is the update order code, returns the order after the using statement is over, outside the using statement. And again, it's very much just a routine now, because now it is very similar to the add order method, which was similar to add customer method. So the difference being, again, what was the difference? Now this you have to update a particular record. So that record has an ID. So you have to add a parameter. It is asking for a parameters, command.parameter.add with value at ID, which gets from order.id. Okay, from this passed in order, the ID of the passed in order, and then the customer ID passed in order object dot customer ID, similarly order.description, at description, and at order cost. So let's see again. You don't need this connection dot close, and finally outside the using statement, it returns the order, and if there is an exception, it logs the exception into the log file like this, error at update order. Now let's put a Ctrl+Shift+B to build the application, and then we'll inspect the stored procedures, the add method and the update. So build succeeded. Now let's flip over to the SQL Server Management Studio and execute these two stored procedures. SP select customer, SP select order we have seen, SP select order by ID we have seen, SP insert into order. Okay, so let's insert into order by executing the stored procedure, and it will of course tell you so that these are the values that it is wanting. Either pass the null value or pass a value. So customer ID, now it has to have a customer in order for because an order is already associated with the customer. So if you pass a customer ID that doesn't exist, then it will not be updated. Let's see what happens. By passing any arbitrary value, say 4. Okay, I don't know whether the customer ID 4 exists or not. So test, let's write test update, and order cost, say this is decimal, and let's see what happens. So insert statement conflicted with the foreign key. So that means this error says a lot, because it says FK order customer, the conflict occurred in the database with PIDB db.customer column ID. Okay, that means this customer ID doesn't exist. So let's see which are the customer IDs available so that we can make an order for that customer. So let's see the customer table for a second. Select top 1000 rows. So we have got customer IDs 13, 16, 17. So you can create the order for any of these customers, say order for a customer ID 17. Okay, so order for customer ID 17. Let's create an order for customer ID 17 and then hit execute. It should be all right. Now this time it is all right. And then if you look into this order table, so db.order, select top 1000 rows and look into customer ID 17. So customer ID 17 is here, and it has got test update, order cost this. All right. So we have been able to update the order table with a proper customer which exists. Okay. And then finally the SP insert into order. This one, okay. SP insert into order, SP update order. All right. What we have tried, insert into order already we have tried. So SP update order and db.sp update order, execute stored procedure. Let's update the order for this same customer ID 17. Okay, so I don't know the ID, customer ID says 17. Okay, description, again updated, order cost also 111.211. Let's see what happens without supplying the ID. Parameter at ID which was not supplied, so I need to supply an ID, the order ID. Okay, so order ID was 54 for this customer ID 17. So order ID, okay, let's again execute it by clicking right click and execute stored procedure. So ID 54, order ID was 54 for this customer ID 17, and this update again, and this time write whatever you want to, and then click on OK. And this time there is no error. So now if you look into this order table, where was the order table? So test update. Okay, let's execute this update again. Okay, with a new order cost. So insert and update order. These stored procedures run all right. So finally we are left with the delete order method. So I'm into the delete order method. Now I have to complete this and get rid of this stub and then dump the code which I've already on my notepad. Now this time it is executing sp delete order. Okay, and the same thing again, connection.close is not required. So command type stored procedure again, and then connection is opened, and then a parameter, a ID parameter is added, which is @ID, and its value is achieved from the passed in ID parameter, and then execute non-query is called because it is a delete procedure. Okay, and again, if it is throws an exception, then logger will log this error at delete order. And then again, let's see this sp delete order in action. Sp delete order. So sp delete order. Now execute this stored procedure. Now this is expecting an ID @ID. So this is this @ID external parameter. Okay. So we have seen there is a ID, order ID that we have created for a customer ID 17. The order ID was, if I remember correctly, 54. So let us see, pass this and click on OK. It should delete this order. All right. So now if we look into this order table, I think better right click and edit top, or select top 1000 rows. Sorry. Order. Okay. Now if you execute this query, so there is no ID of 54, no order ID 54 corresponding to a customer ID 17, which has already been deleted. So in this tutorial, I have completed all of the stored procedures that were left from the last lecture, and I have completed the create, update, delete, and retrieve by ID from the order table. We'll have to first create a controllers folder in the web API project. So right click the web API node and click on add. New folder. Name this controllers. Right click on this controllers folder. Add controller at the top, and I will make it API controller empty because this is a web API project, and click on add. So instead of the values, I will make it home. So home controller.cs. Now home controller is created for me, and because this will be a simple controller that will return a string that the API is running, it will have just one action method, index action method, and I don't need the routing attributes, so I'll get rid of those attributes, and then simply I'll write public string index it returns a string that the API is running, as we have shown, as we have seen in the first lecture, introductory lecture, when both the web API and the MVC client is started. Web API starts with a signal that I am running, web API is running. Okay, so now I'll have to add a couple of NuGet packages. So let's right click the Web API node and manage NuGet packages. So I have got these 4 NuGet packages, 3 of them belonging to the Serilog that we have already explained, and the 4th one is system.data.client. Now I'll have to browse for a NuGet package which is known as Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.MVC.NewtonSoft.json to bring in the NewtonSoft JSON for the JSON objects. Okay. So Microsoft dot Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.MVC.NewtonSoft.json. This is the one that I have to look for. All right, let's click on here and click on install. So I think this is the right version for ASP.NET Core 3.1 and click on install. Click on I accept. It should install this package. So you can see that this is successfully installed, Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.MVC.NewtonSoft.json. And another package that I have to look for is Microsoft. Let me type Microsoft.Visual Studio.web.codegeneration.design. So latest table 5.0.0, it is, I believe, for the .NET or ASP.NET 5, which is the latest version, which was released a few days back, this month only. So I'll take this is the latest version compatible with ASP.NET Core 3.1. So let's click on install. And then this license acceptance screen comes and I accept. So it is installing the NuGet package. So it's all finished. Okay. So now it should come within this installed packages. So this one is installed already. Microsoft.VisualStudio.web.codegeneration.design. Now I have come again to the configure services method of the startup class, and here now that we have the controller in place and we have also added the NewtonSoft JSON package, so I'll have to add it over here. Services instance.add controllers with views. Add controllers with views dot add NewtonSoft JSON. Okay, that's it over here. And in the web API, if you just click on add controllers, that should also do. But I have seen that people are adding to the service add controllers with views even for the web API project. So I'm just going with that. Okay, with the trend. Now in this configure method, so far this was just writing asynchronously to the response stream hello world, if you have seen it earlier. So here I'll have now change to map it to the default home controller. So I'll still keep this as the same app object, iApplication builder. Endpoint goes to endpoints dot, instead of map get, it will be map controller route. Map controller route. All right, and I'll just change whatever was inside, and then this bracket goes, curly brace goes, this curly brace also goes, and map controller route, and within that, just hang on with me for a bit, everything will be all right. So endpoints.map controller route, and then a name property here will be default. So default controller, and the pattern is, there's a pattern, the URL pattern of the route. Okay, it's automatically suggesting pattern, then colon, then get rid of this is okay. Yeah, pattern is within double quotes, within a pair of curly braces. This will be evaluated actually. Pair of curly braces usually mean that this is not a string, but this is something to be evaluated by the application. So controller equals home, and then front slash home controller, and this is the action method. So action equals index, and after the closing curly brace there will be another pair of curly brace within which there is a optional ID. Okay, so this is all right. I'll just indent it a bit to bring it on the line above. All right, so this is all okay. Now let me build the application with Ctrl+Shift+B hotkey combination, and build succeeded. So in this lecture we have seen how to build the home controller, and we have brought in 2 NuGet packages essentially for the controllers to be working, and also we have configured the route for the default controller and the default action method, and also we have used the to the service collection we have add controllers with views and the Newtonsoft JSON package that we have included from the NuGet. Okay, so now let us run this application to see Web API what the response it is producing. So it is loading the browser, and what I would expect is to give us a string, which is what this control is showing. API running, let's see. So API is running. So our web application is already, web API is running. It's working all right. Everything is fine with it so far. So let's now click the controller, right click the controller and add controller and MVC controller empty. It's not, it is the API. Okay, API controller empty. Okay, so click on add. Here I change the name to, instead of values, I'll make it customer. Customer controller class. So here is my customer controller, which also derives from the controller base class, with a route attribute API/controller and another attribute API controller to mark it where it is it's an API controller as opposed to any other type of controller like an MVC controller. All right, so let's start writing. Now, having done the home controller, we see that there are some using statements that are necessary. So I'll bring in a couple of more using statements. So these are using Microsoft.asp.core.hosting and using API.models, because I have to refer to the models folder. All right. So at the moment, only one is being used, Microsoft.asp.core.mvc, but you will see that these some of them will be used. Okay, we will see that later. So I'll have to create a private ICustomerRepository and call this customer repository, because I'll be using the customer repository in the CustomerController class. ICustomerRepository type, name this customer repository. And then CustomerController, this is a public constructor. So CTOR to generate the constructor, empty constructor, and then fill this ICustomerRepository. Call this repo, and I think I don't need anything else at the moment to pass. And then assign this customer repository to repo. Passed in dependency object repo. Okay. And then the next method is, it's an HTTP GET, and this will be getting the customers, get customers. So HTTP GET verb. So it is a retrieve type of operation, select operation. So public, and what this will return? This will return an IEnumerable of customer. So IEnumerable customer, and call this method get customers. Basically it will get all the customers from the repository, get customers. Okay. And then I'll have to fill. Here it will be simply one statement, one line of code, return. Now this customer repository, which is injected as a constructor, constructor parameter or dependency injection. So this will be used here. So return customer repository dot, now get all customers. This is a method, so empty pair of parentheses, and then to list. So I need to get the list, which is of type IEnumerable. Okay. So if you look at this, this will return a list of T. Okay. And because list is actually a type IEnumerable, so it will return the IEnumerable of customers. Right. And then the next method is HTTP GET with ID, get the customer with an ID. So here the only difference will be HTTP GET, that part will be the same, and within a pair of braces, circular braces, and there is a pair of curly brace, and within that curly brace we will have this ID. We are passing ID, and that will be enclosed within quotes, pair of quotes. Okay, and this will be public. What this will return? This will return a customer object. Customer, get customer by ID. I'll take that, but this is by ID. So get customer by ID, and I will pass that ID int ID. And in order to satisfy the return statement will be return, again using the customer repository injected object dot. Now here, as you have seen, that we have got a get customer by ID, and we have to pass the argument passed on to this HTTP get verb, that is the ID, and that's it. And then we'll go for this HTTP post verb to add a customer, and that's a post type of operation. You're adding a customer in an empty form. HTTP post. HTTP post to return customer again, and it's a create method. Now here I'll have to enter from body within single quotes, because this customer will be from the details of the customer will be from the body. Now this from body specifies that a parameter or property should be bound using the request body. Okay, so it is suggestive of what it does. So from body customer, and this customer object is named as customer. All right, and then return again the customer repository in use dot. Now we have got a add customer method, and then pass in this customer object, which is passed to this method by as a parameter. Okay, that's it. And then we have for the update, this is the insert operation. For the update, it will be HTTP. Can you guess what type of verb it will be? It is HTTP put. All right, HTTP put. So here it will be again public, and this will be again customer, it will be returning. And then this is an update operation. I'll simply call this update without going into any other complications. Now the difference between this HTTP post and this HTTP put is that here it will be from the form instead of body. This will be from form. So that means it specifies that a parameter or property should be bound using the form data in the request body, because the user has to fill a form. So it will be getting that information about the customer from the filled in form. Previously it was from the body. Okay. Customer. Okay, and then return customer repository again using that object, injected object dot update customer, and passing in the customer object. Right. So finally we have come to this HTTP delete operation. So delete operation is similar to get operation, only thing that it deletes a record from the database, and here it will be HTTP delete verb with an ID. HTTP delete, and then a pair of empty braces, circular braces, which encloses a pair of curly braces, and that has got an ID value passed, and this pair of curly brace is enclosed within double quotes. All right, so because we are passing the ID. Now this can be simply written as public, and this returns just null. It deletes the record from the database, and pass this integer ID, and then simply return customer repository. Not return, I don't need any return because it's a void customer repository dot delete customer, and passing the ID. Well, that's it, and let's build this application with the Control Shift and B. So again, following the same procedure as before, click on Add Controller, right click on the controllers folder, click on Add Controller, and click on API and API controller empty, following exactly the same process. And then rather than values controller, it will be order controller class. So OrderController.cs. Again, order controller is derived from the controller base class. So here again, I'll make a private IOrderRepository type order repository for injecting into the constructor. Okay, so now let me first bring on this namespaces. So yeah, I have to use the models folder. So using this project.models, I'm inside the controllers folder. So web API.models. Now let's start again. So private. Now I can use the IOrderRepository, IOrderRepository type interface, and call this order repository with one of the suggested names. And I need a public constructor order controller. Okay, so CTOR for constructor shortcut, public order controller, and I pass this IOrderRepository as a dependency object. So IOrderRepository, and call this again repo, and then this order repository for this class is assuming the value, assign the value repo of injected dependency. Okay, now I am ready to use this order repository anywhere. Okay, so that's the beauty of dependency injection, or constructor injection. Is another way of telling this. So simply HTTP GET again, and basically the repetition of similar methods. Only thing that customers will be replaced by orders. So public in IEnumerable type again. So public, it returns an IEnumerable of this time. Order or customer. So it is order because we are writing the order controller. So get orders. And it returns. Can you guess what it returns? It returns using this order repository object. Dot get all orders. IntelliSense says it all. All right, so it will return all orders. And then HTTP post, or you can say HTTP get with ID. So let's first write HTTP get with ID. So get orders by ID, or get order by ID rather. So I'll call this public, and what it will return? It will return order type or order object. So get order by ID and passing an ID of type int, and it will return an order by this statement, again using order repository. Dot get order by ID and passing this ID parameter. That's it. And then I've got this get operations, and then put, post and delete. HTTP first post. Now HTTP post I have put on my clipboard just to save time. So this is again public order. Now this is create method. It gets from body of the request and it passes the order object and it returns order repository dot add order. It calls the add order method. Okay. And similarly, we have got the HTTP put for the update and delete for the delete operation. So HTTP put, HTTP put operation over here. So this will be update public order update. Now update order takes it from the form, okay, as we have seen from the customer controller. It gets it from the form body, from form. And it returns order repository dot update order, okay, and then passing in the order, pass to it from the parameter, okay, as a parameter. Now finally HTTP delete again. Passing an ID like we did for the customer controller, and then it returns again nothing, null, public void delete, gets an integer ID, so order repository dot, it calls the delete order method, okay, and passes in this object, passes in this ID, okay, and that's it. That's pretty much all the operation: delete, update, create, get order by ID, and get orders. And let's build the application again. Control Shift B, and build succeeded. So our CRUD operation for this customer controller, for this order controller, is also through. We have now built the customer controller as well as the order controller.